The morning sun was bright over London as Princess Charlotte sat in the back seat of the royal car. She was 8 years old and loved going on trips with her parents. Today was special. They were going to visit the Tower of London, one of the most famous places in all of England. Charlotte pressed her face against the window and watched the busy streets of London pass by. People were walking fast on the sidewalks. Cars and buses filled the roads. She could see the tall buildings and shops that made up her city. Everything looked so busy and alive. Her mother, the Princess of Wales, sat next to her. She was wearing a beautiful blue dress and looked very elegant. Her father, the Prince of Wales, was in the front seat talking quietly with their driver. Charlotte could tell he was excited about the visit too. He always got a little more serious when they were going somewhere important. The car turned a corner and Charlotte saw something amazing. There in front of them was the Tower of London. It was huge and made of old gray stone. The towers reached up high into the sky. Flags were flying on top of the walls. Charlotte had seen pictures of this place many times, but seeing it in real life was completely different. As their car got closer, Charlotte could see that many people were already there. Tourists from all over the world had come to see this famous place. They were taking pictures and pointing at different parts of the castle. Some were reading books about the history. Others were just standing and looking at the impressive walls. The car stopped at a special entrance. This was not the same door that regular visitors used. This was the royal entrance. Charlotte felt a little flutter of excitement in her stomach. She loved these special moments when she got to see places that most people never got to see. A man in a dark suit opened the car door for Charlotte. He was one of their security guards. He always made sure they were safe wherever they went. Charlotte stepped out of the car and felt the cool morning air on her face. She could smell something different here. It was the smell of old stone and history. Her parents got out of the car too. Right away, several important-looking people came to greet them. These were the officials who worked at the Tower of London. They had been planning this visit for weeks. Everyone was excited to show the royal family around their special place. One of the officials was a woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She wore a badge that said she was the head tour guide. She smiled warmly at Charlotte and said, "Your Royal Highness, we are so happy you could come today. We have many wonderful things to show you." Charlotte smiled back and said thank you in her polite voice. She had been taught from a very young age how to talk to people during official visits, but inside she was bouncing with excitement. She loved learning about history and seeing new places. As they walked toward the entrance, Charlotte noticed something that made her even more excited. There were guards everywhere. But these were not regular guards. These were the famous Queen's Guards that she had heard so much about. The guards wore bright red jackets with shiny buttons. On their heads were tall black hats made of fur. These hats were called bearskin hats, and they made the guards look very tall and important. The guards stood perfectly still like statues. They held rifles and stared straight ahead. They did not move or speak or even blink very much. Charlotte had always been fascinated by these guards. She had seen them at Buckingham Palace many times, but she never got tired of watching them. They looked so serious and brave. Her father had told her that being a Queen's Guard was a very important job. These men and women were some of the best soldiers in all of Britain. The tour guide led Charlotte and her parents through the main entrance. As they walked, she began to tell them about the history of the tower. "This castle is almost 1,000 years old," she said. "It has been a palace, a prison, and a place to keep the crown jewels safe." Charlotte listened carefully. She loved stories about kings and queens from long ago. The tour guide told them about famous people who had lived in the tower. Some were royal families who had lived there happily. Others were prisoners who had been locked up in the dark rooms. As they walked deeper into the tower, Charlotte saw more guards. Each one stood at an important spot. Some were near doorways, others were by the walls. They all looked exactly the same in their red uniforms and tall black hats. Charlotte wondered what it would be like to stand so still for such a long time. The tour guide showed them through different rooms and courtyards. Each place had its own story. There was the room where kings and queens had lived hundreds of years ago. There was the chapel where royal weddings had taken place. There were the walls where prisoners had carved their names into the stone. Charlotte's favorite part was hearing about the ravens that lived at the tower. The tour guide told her that legend said the tower would fall down if the ravens ever left. So they took very good care of the ravens and made sure they always had plenty to eat. As they walked from place to place, Charlotte kept noticing the guards. They were everywhere, watching and protecting. She felt safe knowing they were there, but she also felt curious about them. What were they thinking as they stood so still? Did their feet hurt from standing for so long? Were they hot in those heavy uniforms? The morning was getting warmer as the sun climbed higher in the sky. More and more tourists were arriving at the tower. Charlotte could hear people speaking in different languages. There were families with children, older couples, and groups of friends. Everyone seemed excited to be there. Charlotte felt proud to be showing visitors how much she loved this special place in her country. She wanted everyone who came to the tower to have a wonderful time and learn about the amazing history of England. But as the morning went on, Charlotte began to notice something that worried her. Some of the tourists were not being very respectful to the guards. She saw people trying to make the guards smile or move. She heard some people making jokes about the tall hats. This made Charlotte feel uncomfortable. The guards were doing their job just like her father had taught her. They deserved respect, not jokes. Charlotte decided she would keep watching to make sure everyone was being kind to these brave soldiers who worked so hard to protect everyone at the tower. As the royal tour continued through the Tower of London, Charlotte and her family made their way toward one of the most famous parts of the castle. This was where the crown jewels were kept. Charlotte had been looking forward to this part of the visit all morning. The crown jewels were some of the most beautiful and valuable things in the world. They included crowns that kings and queens had worn for hundreds of years. There were also scepters, orbs, and rings that sparkled with diamonds and other precious stones. Charlotte had seen some of these treasures before, but she never got tired of looking at them. As they got closer to the Crown Jewels building, Charlotte noticed that this area was much more crowded than the other parts of the tower. Many tourists had gathered here because everyone wanted to see the famous jewels. The crowd was bigger and louder than in other places they had visited. The building that held the crown jewels was heavily guarded. There were several Queen's Guards stationed around the entrance and along the walls. These guards had an especially important job because they were protecting some of the most valuable treasures in Britain. Charlotte looked around at all the guards as her family walked toward the entrance. Each guard stood perfectly still in his bright red uniform and tall black hat. They held their rifles in exactly the same way. Their faces showed no expression at all. They looked straight ahead and did not seem to notice all the people around them. But Charlotte noticed something that made her start to feel worried. Near the main entrance to the Crown Jewels building, a very large crowd had formed around one particular guard. This crowd was much bigger than the groups of people she had seen around the other guards. The guard in the center of all this attention was a young man. Charlotte could tell he was probably not much older than some of the older students at her school. He stood at his post just like all the other guards, staring straight ahead with no expression on his face. His uniform was perfect, and his rifle was held in exactly the right position. Charlotte watched as more and more people joined the crowd around this guard. At first, it seemed like the people were just curious. They were taking pictures and pointing at his uniform. Some were reading about the Queen's Guards in their guidebooks. This seemed normal and respectful. But as Charlotte continued to watch, she began to see that something was changing. The crowd was getting bigger and the people were getting louder. What had started as curious tourists taking photos was becoming something different. Charlotte saw a group of teenagers push their way to the front of the crowd. They were laughing and pointing at the guard. One of them held up his phone to take a video. Charlotte could tell from their faces that they were not being respectful. They thought the guard was funny because he could not move or talk back to them. More people joined the teenagers. Some were adults who should have known better. They began to act like the guard was not a real person. They treated him like he was a statue or a toy that was there for their entertainment. Charlotte felt her stomach start to feel sick as she watched what was happening. These people did not understand that the guard was a real person with feelings. They did not know that standing still for hours was actually very hard work. They thought it was a game to try to make him break his concentration. The crowd around the guard kept getting bigger. Charlotte could see that people were starting to push and shove to get closer. Everyone wanted to be in the front so they could take the best pictures and videos. The guard was completely surrounded by people who were not treating him with respect. Charlotte looked around to see if any adults were going to do something about this situation. She saw other guards at their posts, but they had to stay where they were supposed to be. They could not leave their positions to help their fellow guard. She saw some Tower of London workers, but they were busy with other tourists and had not noticed what was happening. Her parents were still talking with the officials about the history of the crown jewels. They were focused on the important information they were learning and had not seen the crowd that was forming around the guard. Charlotte's security guards were watching her family, not the tourists who were gathering nearby. Charlotte realized that no one else had noticed how bad the situation was getting. All the adults who could help were busy with other things. Meanwhile, the crowd around the young guard was getting more and more disrespectful. She watched as someone in the crowd started to wave their hand in front of the guard's face. They were trying to make him blink or look at them. When the guard did not react, they waved their hand even closer to his face. Other people in the crowd laughed when they saw this. Charlotte felt angry. How could these people think this was funny? The guard was doing his job. He was protecting everyone in the tower, including all these tourists who were being mean to him. He deserved respect, not this kind of treatment. The crowd was now so big that it was blocking the path for other visitors. People who wanted to see the crown jewels had to push through the group that was focused on bothering the guard. Some of these other tourists looked annoyed that they could not get through. But instead of asking the crowd to move, they just joined in watching what was happening to the guard. Charlotte could see that the situation was getting worse by the minute. More people were arriving and joining the crowd. The teenagers who had started the whole thing were now taking videos and laughing loudly. Some of the adults were encouraging them instead of telling them to stop. The young guard continued to do his job perfectly. He did not move. He did not speak. He kept his eyes focused straight ahead. But Charlotte was close enough to see his face, and she could tell that this was not easy for him. She could see a tiny bit of strain around his eyes. She could tell that he was working very hard to ignore all the people who were trying to bother him. Charlotte felt proud of the guard for doing his job so well, but she also felt sad for him. It was not fair that he had to deal with all these rude people when he was just trying to protect everyone. She wished the crowd would go away and leave him alone. But the crowd was not going away. Instead, it was getting bigger and louder. Charlotte realized that if no one did something soon, the situation was going to get even worse. The guard needed someone to help him, but all the adults who could help did not know what was happening. Charlotte looked around one more time to see if anyone was going to step in and help the guard, but everyone was busy with their own activities. No one else seemed to understand how disrespectful the crowd was being. That was when Charlotte realized that she might be the only person who could do something to help. Charlotte continued to watch the crowd around the young guard, and what she saw made her feel more upset with each passing minute. What had started as people taking pictures had turned into something much worse. The guard was no longer just being looked at. He was being actively bothered by people who thought his job was some kind of entertainment. The group of teenagers who had started the trouble were now standing right in front of the guard. They were so close that Charlotte worried they might accidentally bump into him. One teenager, a boy with messy hair and a loud voice, seemed to think he was very funny. He was making silly faces just inches away from the guard's face. The boy would scrunch up his nose and stick out his tongue. Then he would make his eyes very wide and open his mouth in a surprised expression. He moved his face closer and closer to the guard, trying to get any kind of reaction. When the guard did not respond, the boy made even sillier faces and his friends laughed louder. Charlotte felt her hands make fists as she watched this. The boy was treating the guard like he was not even a real person. He was acting like the guard was a funny toy that existed only to amuse tourists. Charlotte knew this was wrong, but the boy clearly did not understand how disrespectful he was being. Another teenager, a girl with bright pink hair, joined in the game. She started making funny noises and sounds right next to the guard's ear. She would whistle loudly, then make clicking sounds with her tongue. When the guard continued to stare straight ahead and ignore her, she made the sounds even louder. The girl seemed to think that if she just made enough noise, she could force the guard to break his concentration and look at her. She did not understand that the guard was trained to ignore distractions. She thought his stillness was fake and that she could prove it by being annoying enough. Other people in the crowd saw what the teenagers were doing and began to copy them. A middle-aged man with a camera started waving his hand back and forth in front of the guard's face. He moved his hand slowly at first, then faster and faster. He was trying to make the guard's eyes follow the movement of his hand. When the guard's eyes did not move, the man waved both hands in front of his face. He seemed frustrated that he could not get any reaction. Charlotte could see that the man was getting more aggressive in his attempts to make the guard respond. An older woman joined in by clapping her hands loudly right next to the guard's head. The clapping sound was sharp and sudden. It was the kind of noise that would make anyone jump or at least blink. But the guard remained perfectly still. This seemed to annoy the woman, and she clapped even louder. Charlotte watched in horror as the crowd's behavior got worse and worse. People were no longer just trying to get the guard's attention. They were now deliberately trying to disturb him and make his job harder. They seemed to think it was a challenge to see who could be the most annoying. One man started shouting questions at the guard. "Hey, can you hear me?" he yelled. "What's your name? Do your feet hurt? Are you hot in that uniform?" When the guard did not answer, the man shouted even louder. "I know you can hear me. Why won't you talk to me?" The man did not understand that the guard was not allowed to talk while he was on duty. The rules for Queen's Guards were very strict. They had to remain silent and still no matter what happened around them. This was part of their training and their duty. But the man thought the guard was just being rude by not answering his questions. Another person in the crowd, a young woman with a smartphone, began recording everything that was happening. She held her phone very close to the guard's face while she filmed. She was making a video to share with her friends online. She planned to show everyone how she had found a guard who would not react no matter what people did to him. The woman recording gave commentary as she filmed. "Look at this guy," she said into her phone. "He's like a robot. Watch this." Then she made loud noises and silly faces while recording the guard's unchanging expression. She thought she was creating funny content, but she was really just documenting her own disrespectful behavior. Charlotte noticed that several other people were also recording videos. They all seemed to think they had discovered something amazing and entertaining. They wanted to capture proof that they had found a guard who would not react to anything. They planned to share these videos with friends and post them online. The worst part was when one of the teenagers decided to get even bolder. The boy with messy hair reached out his hand toward the guard's rifle. He did not actually touch it, but he pretended like he was going to. He held his hand just inches away from the weapon and looked around at the crowd to see if they were watching him. Charlotte felt a chill of fear when she saw this. She knew that touching a guard's rifle was absolutely not allowed. It was dangerous and disrespectful. The rifles were real weapons, and the guards took their responsibility to protect them very seriously. Even pretending to touch the rifle was going too far. But the teenager did not understand how serious this was. He thought he was being brave and funny. When he saw that people were watching him and recording him, he moved his hand even closer to the rifle. He was showing off for the crowd and trying to prove how daring he was. Other people in the crowd gasped and laughed when they saw what the boy was doing. Some encouraged him to actually touch the rifle. Others took more pictures and videos. No one told him to stop. No one explained that what he was doing was wrong and potentially dangerous. Charlotte looked at the guard's face and saw something that made her heart hurt. Although the guard's expression had not changed at all, she could see tiny signs of stress around his eyes. There was a slight tension in his jaw that had not been there before. His breathing was just a little bit different. The guard was still doing his job perfectly. He had not moved or spoken or shown any obvious reaction to the crowd. But Charlotte could tell that this situation was difficult for him. He was a real person with real feelings, and being surrounded by people who were trying to bother and disturb him was not easy. Charlotte realized that the guard could not defend himself. His job required him to stay still and silent no matter what happened. He could not tell the crowd to go away. He could not ask for help. He could not even show that their behavior was bothering him. He was completely defenseless against their disrespect. The crowd was getting bigger and more excited. People were pushing closer to get a better view. The noise was getting louder as more people joined in trying to get a reaction from the guard. What had started with a few teenagers making faces had turned into a large group of people all trying to disturb one young soldier who was just doing his job. Charlotte felt her anger growing stronger. These people had no idea what they were doing. They thought they were having harmless fun, but they were actually being cruel to someone who could not fight back. The guard deserved better treatment than this. He deserved respect and appreciation for his service, not harassment and mockery. Charlotte looked around again to see if any adults were going to step in and stop this. But her parents were still busy with their official tour. The security guards were focused on protecting her family. The tower officials were occupied with other visitors. No one in authority had noticed what was happening to the guard. Charlotte realized that the situation was only going to get worse unless someone did something. The crowd was growing bolder and more disrespectful with each passing minute. Soon someone might actually touch the guard or his equipment. The harassment had to stop before it went too far. But who was going to stop it? Charlotte was just 8 years old. She was much smaller than all the people in the crowd. What could she possibly do to help the guard? Despite her young age and small size, Charlotte felt a strong determination growing inside her. She could not just stand there and watch this happen. The guard needed help, and she might be the only person who could provide it. Charlotte stood at the edge of the crowd watching the terrible scene unfold before her. Her small hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Her heart was beating fast with anger and worry for the young guard who could not defend himself. She had never felt so upset about the way people were treating another person. While the crowd continued to grow louder and more disrespectful around the guard, Charlotte looked around to see where all the adults were who should be helping. Her parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, were standing about 20 feet away. They were deep in conversation with several Tower of London officials. The officials were showing her parents some old documents about the history of the crown jewels. Charlotte could see her father nodding seriously as he looked at the papers. Her mother was asking questions about the different crowns and their stories. They were completely focused on learning about the important historical items they had come to see. Charlotte understood why her parents were not paying attention to the crowd around the guard. This was an official royal visit, and they had many important things to learn and discuss. The tower officials had planned this visit carefully, and there was a lot of information to share. Her parents were doing their job as members of the royal family, but Charlotte wished they would look over and see what was happening to the guard. She knew that if her father saw how the tourists were behaving, he would do something about it immediately. Her father had taught her that all people deserved respect, especially those who served their country. He would be very upset to see a British soldier being treated this way. Charlotte looked for her governess, the woman who was responsible for watching over her during official events. She found her standing near a wall, checking something on her phone. The governess was probably updating Charlotte's schedule or communicating with other staff members about the day's plans. She was busy with her own responsibilities and had not noticed the situation with the guard. The royal protection officers were positioned around the area, but they were focused on watching for any threats to Charlotte's family. Their job was to keep the royal family safe, not to manage the behavior of tourists around other guards. They were scanning the crowd for anything suspicious, but they did not see the harassment as a security issue that required their attention. Charlotte realized that all the adults who might help were busy with their own important jobs. No one was specifically responsible for making sure that tourists treated the guards with respect. The Tower of London staff were helping other visitors and managing the flow of people through the buildings. Everyone had something else to do. This made Charlotte feel even more frustrated. How could so many grown-ups be in one place and not notice that something wrong was happening? How could they not see that a young soldier was being bullied by a crowd of tourists? Were adults really so busy with their own tasks that they could not see when someone needed help? Charlotte had been taught from a very young age to notice when others were in trouble. Her parents had explained to her that being a member of the royal family meant having a responsibility to help people. They had told her that she should always stand up for those who could not stand up for themselves. At home and at school, Charlotte was known for defending other children when they were being picked on. If she saw someone being left out or treated unfairly, she would step in to help. Her teachers and parents were proud of how she looked out for others. They had told her this was one of her best qualities, but this situation was different from anything Charlotte had faced before. At school, she was dealing with other children her own age. Here, she was looking at a crowd of adults and teenagers who were all much bigger than her. They were not people she knew. They were strangers from different countries who might not even speak English as their first language. Charlotte also knew that this was a very public place with many people watching. Anything she did would be seen by hundreds of tourists and probably recorded on many phones. If she made a mistake or said something wrong, it could cause problems for her family and for the royal reputation. Despite all these concerns, Charlotte could not ignore what was happening to the guard. Every time she looked at his face, she could see the strain of trying to remain professional while being surrounded by people who were treating him badly. She could see that he was a real person with real feelings, not just a tourist attraction. Charlotte thought about what her father had taught her about duty and service. He had explained that the guards at royal palaces and important buildings had one of the most difficult jobs in the country. They had to stand perfectly still for hours at a time. They had to ignore distractions and remain alert for any real dangers. They had to do all of this while wearing heavy uniforms and carrying equipment. Her father had also told her that these guards were some of the best soldiers in the British Army. They had trained for months, or even years, to earn the right to be Queen's Guards. It was considered a great honor to be chosen for this duty. The men and women who became guards were proud of their service and took their responsibilities very seriously. Knowing all of this made Charlotte even more angry about how the tourists were treating the guard. They had no idea that they were bothering someone who had worked very hard to earn his position. They did not understand that his stillness and silence were signs of his discipline and training, not an invitation to try to break his concentration. Charlotte looked at the guard one more time and made a decision. She could not stand there and watch this happen any longer, even if she was just 8 years old. Even if she was much smaller than everyone in the crowd, she had to do something. The guard needed someone to defend him, and she was the only person who seemed to understand how wrong the situation was. Charlotte also realized that she had something the other people in the area did not have. She was Princess Charlotte. People knew who she was, and they would listen to her in a way they might not listen to other children. Her royal title gave her a special kind of authority that she could use to help the guard. She had been taught that being a princess was not just about wearing nice clothes and living in palaces. It was about using her position to help others and to do what was right. This seemed like exactly the kind of situation where she should use her royal status to make a difference. Charlotte took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She smoothed down her dress and checked to make sure she looked neat and proper. If she was going to speak to this crowd of adults, she wanted to make sure she looked like the princess she was. She wanted them to take her seriously. She looked one more time at her parents, who were still busy with their official conversations. She looked at her governess and security guards, who were focused on their own duties. Then she looked back at the crowd around the guard, which was getting louder and more aggressive by the minute. Charlotte knew that she was about to do something that would surprise everyone. She was about to step into a situation that adults should be handling. She was about to speak up in a way that 8-year-olds rarely did. But she also knew that it was the right thing to do. The guard needed help, and she was going to help him. Princess Charlotte began to walk toward the crowd, her small chin raised with determination. She had made up her mind. She was going to stop this harassment no matter what it took. Charlotte walked toward the crowd with steady, determined steps. Her heart was beating very fast, but she did not let her nervousness show on her face. She had learned from watching her parents that when you needed to speak with authority, you had to look confident and calm, even if you felt scared inside. As she got closer to the group of people surrounding the guard, Charlotte could hear exactly what they were saying and doing. The sounds were even worse up close than they had been from a distance. People were laughing loudly, making rude comments and trying to outdo each other in their attempts to disturb the guard. The teenager with messy hair was now making animal noises right next to the guard's ear. He was barking like a dog, then mooing like a cow, then making monkey sounds. Each time he made a noise, his friends would laugh and encourage him to try something even sillier. They thought they were being incredibly clever and funny. The man with the camera had started snapping pictures with a very bright flash, even though flash photography was not supposed to be used inside the tower buildings. The sudden bursts of bright light were probably uncomfortable for the guard, but he continued to stare straight ahead. Without blinking or reacting in any way, Charlotte saw that the woman who had been clapping had now started humming loudly and off-key right in front of the guard's face. She was humming songs from popular movies and television shows, apparently trying to see if she could get the guard to recognize any of the tunes and react to them. Most disturbing of all, Charlotte noticed that the teenager who had been pretending to touch the guard's rifle was now being encouraged by others in the crowd to actually do it. People were saying things like, "Go ahead, just touch it quickly, and I bet nothing will happen if you just tap it with one finger." Charlotte knew this was extremely dangerous. Touching a guard's weapon was absolutely forbidden and could result in serious consequences. But the people in the crowd did not seem to understand this. They thought it would be exciting to see what would happen if someone actually broke one of the most important rules. As Charlotte reached the edge of the crowd, she realized that none of the tourists had noticed her approaching. They were all so focused on trying to get a reaction from the guard that they were not paying attention to anything else happening around them. This gave Charlotte a moment to observe the situation more closely and plan what she was going to say. She could see the guard's face clearly now. Although his expression remained perfectly neutral and professional, Charlotte noticed small signs that showed how difficult this situation was for him. There was a tiny muscle in his jaw that was slightly tense. His breathing was very carefully controlled. His eyes, while staring straight ahead, showed just the smallest hint of strain. Charlotte felt a surge of admiration for the guard. Even surrounded by all these people who were trying to disturb him, he was still doing his job perfectly. He was protecting the crown jewels and maintaining the dignity of his uniform and position. He was showing incredible self-control and discipline. This made Charlotte even more determined to help him. The guard was clearly a good person who was trying to do his duty despite very difficult circumstances. He deserved to be treated with respect, not harassment. Charlotte decided that she was going to make sure these tourists understood that. Charlotte took one more deep breath and stepped forward into the crowd. At first, the people around her did not notice that a young girl had joined their group. They were too busy with their activities to pay attention to someone so much shorter than they were. But Charlotte was not going to let them ignore her. She had come here to help the guard, and she was going to make sure everyone listened to what she had to say. Charlotte cleared her throat and spoke in a clear, strong voice that cut through all the noise and laughter. "Excuse me," Charlotte said loudly enough for everyone in the crowd to hear her. Her voice had the kind of natural authority that came from years of royal training. Even though she was only 8 years old, she spoke with the confidence of someone who was used to being listened to and respected. The effect of her voice was immediate. The teenager making animal noises stopped in the middle of a monkey sound. The woman humming fell silent. The man with the camera lowered his phone. Everyone in the crowd turned to look at the small girl who had just spoken to them with such clear authority. At first, the people in the crowd looked confused. They saw a young girl in a nice dress who was clearly not a tourist like them. She looked different from the other children who were visiting the tower with their families. There was something about the way she stood and spoke that made them pay attention, even though they were not sure why. Charlotte looked around at all the faces staring at her. Some people looked surprised. Others looked annoyed that their fun had been interrupted. A few looked curious about what this young girl was going to say. But all of them were listening, which was exactly what Charlotte had hoped for. "This gentleman is doing his job," Charlotte continued, her voice staying strong and clear. She gestured toward the guard, who was still standing perfectly still in the center of the crowd. "He deserves your respect, not your ridicule." The way Charlotte spoke made several people in the crowd start to realize that she was not just any ordinary child. Her accent was clearly upper-class British. Her vocabulary was more advanced than most 8-year-olds. Her posture and manner of speaking suggested that she came from a very important family. One woman in the crowd gasped and whispered to her husband, "Do you think that could be?" But she did not finish her sentence because she was not sure if she could believe what she was thinking. The teenager with messy hair looked annoyed that someone had interrupted his performance. "It's just a game," he said to Charlotte. "We're not hurting anyone. He can't even hear us because he's not a real person. He's like a robot." Charlotte felt her anger flare up at these words. How could anyone think that the guard was not a real person? How could they not see that he had feelings and deserved to be treated with dignity? This was exactly the kind of thinking that had caused the problem in the first place. "He is absolutely a real person," Charlotte said firmly, her voice getting stronger with each word. "He is a British soldier who is working very hard to protect all of us, including you. The fact that he cannot respond to you does not give you the right to treat him badly." More people in the crowd were starting to look uncomfortable. Charlotte's words were making them realize that what they had been doing might not be as harmless as they had thought. Some of them were beginning to understand that they had been behaving disrespectfully towards someone who was just trying to do his job. But Charlotte was not finished. She had more to say to this crowd, and she was going to make sure they understood exactly why their behavior was wrong. The guard had been suffering in silence for too long. It was time for someone to speak up for him. and Charlotte was going to make sure her voice was heard clearly by everyone present. Charlotte took another step forward and prepared to continue her intervention. She was no longer nervous about speaking to this crowd of adults. She was focused on her mission to defend the guard and make sure he was treated with the respect he deserved. The moment Charlotte finished speaking, something amazing happened in the crowd. It was as if her words had cast a spell over all the people who had been behaving so badly just seconds before. The change was so sudden and complete that it took Charlotte's breath away. The first person to recognize who Charlotte was turned out to be an older woman from Scotland. She had been visiting London with her daughter and granddaughter, and she was very familiar with the royal family. When she heard Charlotte speak with such authority and confidence, she looked more closely at the young girl's face. "Oh my goodness," the woman whispered, her hand flying to cover her mouth.
"That's Princess Charlotte."
Her voice was quiet, but in the sudden silence that had fallen over the crowd, everyone could hear her clearly. The effect of these words was like watching dominoes fall. One by one, the people in the crowd began to really look at Charlotte for the first time. They saw her carefully styled hair, her expensive dress, and the way she carried herself with natural royal bearing. Most importantly, they recognized her face from newspapers, television, and magazines. The teenager with messy hair, who had been making animal noises just moments before, turned completely red in the face. His mouth fell open in shock and embarrassment. He realized that he had just been told off by a member of the British royal family, and his silly behavior had been witnessed by Princess Charlotte herself. His friends, who had been laughing and encouraging him, now looked equally horrified. They suddenly understood that their harmless fun had been seen by one of the most important young people in the entire country. They began to back away from the guard, looking at the ground and whispering apologies to each other. The man who had been taking pictures with the bright flash quickly lowered his camera and put it away. His face showed that he was deeply ashamed of his behavior. He had been trying to disturb a guard who was protecting the same royal family that included the young princess who was now standing right in front of him. The woman who had been humming loudly stopped and took several steps backward. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. She could not believe that she had been acting so disrespectfully, while a real princess was watching her every move. All around the crowd, people were having the same reaction. Phones were quickly put away. The loud talking and laughing stopped completely. People who had been pushing forward to get closer to the guard now moved back to give him more space. The entire atmosphere changed from one of chaotic harassment to one of respectful silence. Charlotte watched this transformation with amazement. She had hoped that speaking up would help the guard, but she had not expected such a dramatic change in everyone's behavior. The crowd that had been so rude and disruptive just minutes ago was now quiet and ashamed, but Charlotte was not finished with what she had to say. She could see that the people were starting to understand who she was, and she wanted to use this moment to teach them something important about respect and kindness. "These guards protect all of us, including my family," Charlotte continued, her voice still clear and strong. She gestured toward the young guard, who remained at his post but seemed to be standing a little straighter now that the harassment had stopped. "They deserve our gratitude, not harassment." Several people in the crowd nodded their heads in agreement. They were beginning to understand that the guards were not tourist attractions or entertainment. They were real people doing a real job that was important for the safety and security of everyone in Britain. Charlotte saw that she had everyone's complete attention, so she decided to help them understand even more about what the guards did and why their job was so important. "This guard has been standing here for hours," she explained, speaking directly to the people who had been bothering him. "He cannot sit down. He cannot take a break. He cannot talk or move even when people are being unkind to him. He does this because he is protecting something very precious to our country." The teenager who had been making animal noises looked like he was about to cry. He finally understood that the guard was not a robot or a statue. He was a real person who had feelings and who had been hurt by all the mean things the crowd had been doing to him. "I'm sorry," the teenager said quietly, looking toward the guard even though he knew the guard could not respond. "I didn't know. I thought it was just a game." Other people in the crowd began to murmur their own apologies. They were talking to each other and to Charlotte, expressing their regret for how they had behaved. Many of them said they had never thought about the guards as real people before. They had just seen them as part of the tourist experience. Charlotte felt pleased that her words were helping people understand, but she also felt sad that it had taken her intervention for them to realize something that should have been obvious. Why had they not been able to see from the beginning that the guard was a person who deserved respect? One woman in the crowd, a tourist from America, stepped forward and spoke to Charlotte directly. "Your Royal Highness," she said, using Charlotte's proper title, "you are absolutely right. We were being very disrespectful and we're sorry. Thank you for teaching us to be better." This woman's words seemed to give other people the courage to speak up as well. Soon, many people in the crowd were expressing their apologies and thanking Charlotte for helping them understand why their behavior had been wrong. The man who had been taking flash pictures spoke up next. "I have children at home," he said, looking embarrassed. "I would be very upset if anyone treated them the way we were treating this guard. I should have known better." Charlotte felt a warm feeling in her chest as she listened to these apologies. She could see that the people in the crowd were not bad people. They had just made a mistake because they had not been thinking clearly about what they were doing. Now that they understood, they were genuinely sorry and wanted to do better. The crowd began to disperse naturally as people realized that their behavior had been inappropriate. Some left the area entirely, feeling too embarrassed to stay. Others moved to a respectful distance where they could still see the guard but were not bothering him in any way. A few people stayed to take pictures, but now they were doing it quietly and respectfully. They were photographing the guard as a way of showing appreciation for his service, not as a way of trying to make him break his concentration. Charlotte looked around at the much smaller and quieter group that remained near the guard. The atmosphere was completely different now. Instead of chaos and harassment, there was calm and respect. The guard was able to do his job in peace, just as he should have been able to do from the beginning. But Charlotte noticed something that made her feel even better about what she had accomplished. Some of the people who were still in the area were now talking quietly to each other about the guards and their important work. They were sharing information they had learned about the history and traditions of the Queen's Guard. Parents were explaining to their children why it was important to be respectful to people who were working. Children were asking questions about what it would be like to be a guard and how much training it required. The guard had gone from being seen as a tourist attraction to being respected as a professional, doing an important job. Charlotte realized that she had not just stopped the harassment of one guard. She had taught a group of people something important about respect and kindness that they could carry with them for the rest of their lives. They would remember this lesson and hopefully treat other people better in the future because of what they had learned today. As the crowd continued to disperse and the area around the guard became peaceful again, Charlotte found herself standing much closer to him than she had been before. Now that the harassment had stopped and the loud tourists had moved away, she could really look at the young soldier for the first time. The guard was probably in his early 20s, Charlotte thought. He had a kind face underneath the serious expression that his training required him to maintain. His uniform was perfectly pressed and every button shined brightly. His tall black bearskin hat sat exactly straight on his head. His rifle was held in precisely the correct position. Charlotte could see that this guard took great pride in his appearance and his duty. Every detail of his uniform and equipment was perfect. This was clearly someone who worked very hard to do his job well and who respected the important traditions he was part of. But most importantly, Charlotte could see in the guard's eyes that he was grateful for what she had done. Although he had to continue staring straight ahead and could not speak or move, there was something different about his expression now. The strain and tension that Charlotte had noticed before were gone. He looked calmer and more relaxed. Charlotte realized that this guard, whose name she did not even know, had been suffering in silence while the tourists harassed him. He had been doing his duty perfectly, but inside he had been hurt and frustrated by the way people were treating him. Now that the harassment had stopped, he could focus on his job without having to endure constant distraction and disrespect. The young princess felt a strong connection to this guard. Even though they could not speak to each other, she felt like they understood something important together. They both knew what it was like to have a duty to serve their country. They both understood that sometimes doing the right thing meant staying calm and strong even when other people were not being kind. Charlotte had been taught that being a member of the royal family meant she had responsibilities to help others and to represent the best values of Britain. The guard had been taught that being a Queen's Guard meant he had responsibilities to protect important places and people. even when it was difficult or uncomfortable. In that moment, Charlotte felt like she and the guard were part of the same team. They were both young people who were trying to do their duty and serve others. They both understood that their positions came with special responsibilities that not everyone could understand. As Charlotte stood there looking at the guard, something remarkable happened. For just a brief moment, the guard's eyes moved slightly to look down at her. It was the tiniest movement, so small that anyone who was not paying close attention would have missed it completely. But Charlotte saw it, and she understood what it meant. The guard was acknowledging what she had done for him. He was thanking her in the only way he could while still following the strict rules of his position. That small movement of his eyes was his way of saying thank you to the young princess who had defended him. Charlotte felt her heart fill with warmth when she saw the guard's brief acknowledgement. She knew that what she had witnessed was very special. Queen's guards were trained never to break their concentration or show any reaction to what was happening around them. The fact that this guard had risked even the smallest movement to thank her showed how much her help had meant to him. The guard's eyes quickly returned to staring straight ahead, and his expression became perfectly neutral again. To anyone else watching, it would look like nothing had happened at all. But Charlotte knew that she had just shared a moment of real connection with a brave young soldier who appreciated what she had done. Charlotte wanted to let the guard know that she had seen his thanks and that she understood how difficult his job was, but she also knew that she could not do anything that would get him in trouble or make his job harder. She needed to acknowledge his thanks in a way that would not break any rules or draw attention from other people. Charlotte thought for a moment about what would be the best way to respond. Then she had an idea. She would give the guard a small, encouraging smile. This would let him know that she had seen his acknowledgement and that she respected him and his service. A smile would be appropriate and kind, but it would not cause any problems for the guard. Charlotte looked up at the guard's face and gave him the warmest, most encouraging smile she could manage. It was the kind of smile that said, "I understand, and you are doing a wonderful job, and I am proud of you all at the same time." She kept the smile gentle and brief, so it would not attract attention from other people nearby. The guard's expression did not change outwardly, but Charlotte thought she could see just the tiniest softening around his eyes. She believed that he had seen her smile and understood that she respected him and appreciated his service to their country. After giving the guard her encouraging smile, Charlotte knew it was time for her to step back and let him do his job in peace. She had accomplished what she set out to do. The harassment had stopped, the crowd had learned an important lesson about respect, and the guard could now focus on his duty without distraction. Charlotte took a few steps backward, giving the guard more space. As she moved away, she felt proud of what she had accomplished. She had seen something wrong happening, and she had found the courage to step in and fix it. She had used her position as a princess to help someone who could not help himself. But more than that, Charlotte felt like she had learned something important about what it really meant to be a member of the royal family. It was not just about wearing nice clothes and living in palaces. It was about using her position to help others and to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult or scary. Charlotte also felt like she understood the guards much better now. Before today, she had seen them as impressive and important, but she had not fully realized that they were real people with real feelings who sometimes needed help and support. She had learned that even the strongest and most disciplined people could be hurt by unkind treatment. As Charlotte walked back toward where her parents were still engaged in their official conversations, she felt different than she had when the day began. She felt more grown up and more confident in her ability to make a difference in the world. She had faced a difficult situation and handled it well. Charlotte also felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that she had helped someone who really needed help. The guard would be able to finish his shift with dignity and respect, instead of having to endure more harassment from thoughtless tourists. That felt like a very worthwhile accomplishment. Most importantly, Charlotte felt like she had honored the values that her parents had taught her about kindness, respect, and standing up for others. She had shown that even a young princess could make a real difference when she saw something wrong and decided to take action. The connection she had felt with the guard would stay with Charlotte for a long time. She would always remember the gratitude she had seen in his eyes, and the way he had thanked her with that tiny movement. She would remember that behind every uniform was a real person who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Charlotte knew that this experience would change how she thought about the guards she saw at Buckingham Palace and other royal locations. She would always remember that they were not just part of the scenery, but real people doing important and difficult work that deserved appreciation and respect. As Charlotte walked back toward her parents, she noticed that several people in the area were still talking quietly about what had just happened. Some of the tourists who had witnessed her intervention were sharing the story with friends and family members who had not seen it themselves. Word was spreading quickly through the Tower of London about the young princess who had stood up for a harassed guard. Charlotte could hear bits and pieces of these conversations as she passed by different groups of people. "Did you see what Princess Charlotte just did?" one woman was saying to her husband. "She was so brave and confident. I can't believe she's only 8 years old." Another group was discussing how impressed they were with Charlotte's maturity and sense of justice. "She could have just ignored the situation," one man was saying, "but she chose to get involved and help someone who couldn't help himself. That shows real character." A family with young children was using what they had witnessed as a teaching moment. The parents were explaining to their kids why Charlotte's actions had been so admirable and why it was important to treat all people with respect, regardless of their job or position in life. Charlotte felt a warm glow of pride as she listened to these conversations. She had not been trying to impress anyone or get attention for herself. She had simply seen something wrong and tried to fix it. But it made her happy to know that other people had noticed and appreciated what she had done. More importantly, Charlotte could see that her actions had created a ripple effect of kindness and respect throughout the tower. People were now looking at all the guards with new appreciation. She saw tourists approaching guards to take respectful photographs instead of trying to disturb them. She heard people sharing interesting facts about the Queen's Guard with their children. The atmosphere in the entire area had changed because of what Charlotte had done. Instead of treating the guards like tourist attractions, visitors were now treating them as the professional soldiers they were. The guards could do their jobs with dignity and respect, just as they deserved. When Charlotte reached her parents, they were just finishing their conversation with the Tower officials. Her father, the Prince of Wales, turned to her with a smile. "Did you enjoy learning about the crown jewels, Charlotte?" he asked. Charlotte was about to answer when one of the Tower officials, a distinguished gentleman with gray hair, stepped forward. "Your Royal Highness," he said, addressing Charlotte's father, "I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but we've just heard about something remarkable that Princess Charlotte did while you were touring the jewels." Charlotte's mother, the Princess of Wales, looked curious. "Oh, what happened?" she asked. The official went on to explain what several visitors and staff members had told him about Charlotte's intervention with the crowd around the guard. He described how she had noticed the harassment, stepped in to stop it, and spoken to the tourists about treating the guards with respect. As the official told the story, Charlotte watched her parents' faces. She was a little nervous about how they would react. She had not asked permission before getting involved, and she wondered if they might think she had done something wrong by stepping into a situation with adults. But Charlotte needn't have worried. Her father's face showed pride and approval as he listened to the account of what his daughter had done. Her mother smiled warmly and reached out to take Charlotte's hand. "Charlotte," her father said when the official finished speaking, "I am very proud of you. You saw someone who needed help and you had the courage to step in and defend him. That shows excellent judgment and real character." Her mother squeezed Charlotte's hand gently. "You did exactly what we would hope you would do in that situation," she said. "You showed kindness and stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself. Those are the qualities that make a true leader." Charlotte felt a rush of happiness and relief. Not only were her parents not upset with her for getting involved, they were actually proud of what she had done. This confirmation from the two people she most looked up to made her feel even better about her decision to help the guard. The Tower official smiled at the royal family. "If I may say so, Your Royal Highnesses, Princess Charlotte's actions today have made a real difference. Not only did she help one of our guards, but she also taught a valuable lesson to everyone who witnessed what happened. People are talking about respect and kindness because of what she did." As the royal family continued their tour of the tower, Charlotte noticed that their reception was even warmer than it had been earlier in the day. Word had spread among the staff and visitors about what the young princess had done, and everyone seemed eager to show their appreciation. Several tower employees made a point of thanking Charlotte personally for standing up for their colleague. "That guard is a good young man," one older staff member told her. "He works very hard and takes his job seriously. It means a lot that you defended him." Even some of the tourists who had not witnessed the incident came up to Charlotte and her family to express their admiration. They had heard the story from others and wanted to tell Charlotte how impressed they were with her actions. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came near the end of their visit. As the royal family was preparing to leave, Charlotte saw the guard she had defended walking across the courtyard. His shift had ended and he was heading to change out of his ceremonial uniform. When the guard saw Charlotte, he did something that surprised everyone watching. He stopped, turned toward her, and gave her a proper military salute. It was his way of publicly thanking the young princess who had stood up for him when he could not defend himself. Charlotte felt tears of happiness come to her eyes as she watched the guard's salute. She knew that this moment would stay with her forever. She had made a real difference in someone's life, and he was showing his gratitude in the most respectful way he knew how. Charlotte's father noticed the exchange and was clearly moved by it. He put his hand on Charlotte's shoulder and said quietly, "That young man will remember what you did for him for the rest of his life. You've shown him that his service is valued and appreciated. That's a gift you've given him that he'll never forget." As they drove home from the Tower of London, Charlotte reflected on everything that had happened during their visit. She had started the day excited to see the crown jewels and learn about history. She was ending the day having learned something much more important, about herself and about what it meant to serve others. Charlotte realized that this experience had changed her understanding of what it meant to be a princess. It was not just about the privileges and special treatment that came with her position. It was about using those privileges to help others and to make the world a little bit better and kinder. The story of Charlotte's intervention at the Tower of London spread far beyond that day. News outlets picked up the story and shared it with people around the world. The incident became an example of how even young people could make a difference when they chose to stand up for what was right. More importantly, the story inspired other people to think about how they treated others, especially those who were working in service positions. Charlotte's example reminded everyone that behind every uniform, every job, and every role was a real person who deserved respect and kindness. Years later, when Charlotte looked back on this day, she would remember it as the moment when she truly understood what her royal position was for. It was not about being better than other people. It was about using her influence to protect those who needed protection and to speak up for those who could not speak for themselves. The guard, whose name Charlotte learned was James Mitchell, would go on to have a distinguished military career, but he would always remember the day when a brave, 8-year-old princess defended him from harassment and reminded a crowd of tourists that he was a person worthy of respect. And Charlotte would always remember that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply to stand up for someone who needed help. Regardless of how young or small you might be, that lesson would guide her for the rest of her life and help shape her into the kind of leader her country needed.